Hello, this is Miss Kyler, and I'm going to be telling you about what you need to do for Essay 2. Essay 2 is going to be a descriptive narrative, so you'll need to review both Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Look at the detail in the anguish cries in a place of silence and in the boys to get an idea of what we are expecting for this essay. So here is your prompt. Describe an important moment in your life using strong sensory detail. Emphasis is on the word moment. You're not telling me your whole life story. You're not telling me about 3 or 4 weeks or your whole career in grade school. You're going to just tell me about one defining moment. So you'll start out by establishing the setting and mood using sensory details and metaphors, similes as needed. You want to make sure your readers can experience the world and know it the way you do. Very important to establish the setting first, because if you start out just internal inside yourself, your reader has no way to orient themselves to where all of this is taking place. So think about the way Maya Angelou sets up the idea about the store and describes the store as a happy place and a place where she felt comfortable and is like a big package waiting to be unwrapped, and how that contrasts with what happened later on. So start out describing your world, then introduce the moment and its impact on you and others, and reflect on what you learned from that moment. So when I talk about the reflecting, think about that little internal monologue that Maya Angelou has near the end of The Boys, where she's reflecting on the impact of what the sheriff had said and what the boys are doing and why all of this is happening. Leave off with a strong, dominant image that conveys the main point of your narrative. Again, we're imitating Maya Angelou in this, in the way that she leaves off with that tragic, sad, horrible thought of her uncle being humiliated in that manner when having to hide the way he has to. So remember, focus on the dominant mood or impression you want to express through focus on specific details. You don't have to just describe the whole thing. Describe the key elements that will help your reader understand and connect. For example, if you were describing your room and you wanted to make it like a very cool place, you may focus on one corner where you have maybe your guitar and a poster of your favorite movie. And it feels like a comfortable, cool place to be. So include some key pieces of dialogue that are important to furthering the main message of the narrative. Again, like Maya Angelou just uses some very specific pieces of dialogue in her article. And these pieces of dialogue are important because it couldn't be conveyed in the narration. It has to be the words of the actual person and the way that they said it to actually get across the point. So overall requirements: no sources. This is not a research paper. No sources other than your own experience, the dialogue of those involved in it with you. So you will not have to be doing any citing. You'll be using MLA format. Do include the MLA heading on the first page. You do not need to include the MLA header. Remember, the last name of the page number in the header does not always translate well into Connect. So mainly at the heading, you'll be using Times New Roman, 12-point font, double spacing. A title, very specific, original title centered, and the rest of it is left aligned with each paragraph indented at the first line. You can use I, so it's a personal narrative, so of course you're going to be using I, but avoid using the generalized you. Keep the language and tone more formal. The dialogue can be informal because you're going to be using the words of the actual people, but the rest of it should be more academic. The length should be at least 700 words. And you need to have at least 5 paragraphs. You can start feeling more comfortable adding more body paragraphs if you want to, but you should have at least an introduction, at least 3 body paragraphs, and at least a conclusion. Here are some example thesis statements that may help you when you are forming yours. Defining moments like this remind us that we are only a small part of the universe, and yet the impact we can make on others is immeasurable. I want you to see that what we're noticing here is that we're emphasizing the topic, which is the moment that actually happened, and then what we want to say about it, which is something that not only did we learn from it, but our readers can learn from it as well. Remember, our audience and our purpose, we're wanting to help others also learn from our experience so that our experience becomes more meaningful. That moment when I joined my friends in standing up for what is right helped me realize that if we all work together, we can make this world a better place. Learning how to ride the bicycle when I was a kid taught me to never give up in all of my life's challenges. So you see how all of these are lessons that are not just meaningful for the writer, but meaningful for the audience as well. Here's some strategies. I have 2 strategies for an intro you could use for this type of essay. You could start out with some background information, explain why that background information is so important to the narrative, what happened before all of this got started, and explain how the narrative is important because it revolves around a universal concept that people should be aware of, and end with your thesis statement. A more dramatic introduction strategy, so if you're into the drama, start at the peak of the narrative, that climactic moment when you realize your dream or when you suddenly made that important discovery. Explain how that moment did not just happen and the importance of understanding what led up to that moment, and explain how that experience revolves around an important concept, and end with your thesis statement. So this is what you want to do in your body paragraphs. So the first part of your body, you want to establish the world of your narrative, like I said, describing it in detail with the sensory details, any metaphors or similes that you may need to convey that world to your reader. So you give your reader a place where they can orient themselves. Establish the dominant impression, just like Maya Angelou did with it being a beautiful gift waiting to be unwrapped. In the second part of your body, you want to introduce the event, describe what led up to that event, and describe what happened during the event. You may consider including selected bits of dialogue here. At the end of the body of your paper, you will leave off with a dominant image that establishes the main concept you learned from this experience. Describe that image and reflect on what happened, why, and reflect on what you learned. So go back to the idea you emphasized in your thesis. You may consider including a bit of internal monologue at this part, where you're reflecting on that concept. In your conclusion, you may reflect a little bit more on how you arrived at this moment, and then conclude with the main point learned and how that idea is helpful to others, what others can learn from your experience. If you chose to do the more dramatic introduction strategy, you may want to use this more dramatic conclusion strategy. You may come back to the moment where you start the paper, back to that climactic moment before the flashback, reflect on the steps that brought you to this peak point in your life, and recap on what you learned from it all and what others can learn from your experience. We're always wanting to make that complete circle back to your audience. So now that we talked about what you're going to do with the essay, now you can start brainstorming. And here are some guiding questions that will help you get started. So think about, what experience will you write about? What dominant impression do you want to present at the beginning, middle, and end of your essay? What specific objects, or place, or person will you describe in detail? What will you focus on? Make sure you're specific. Consider all 5 of the senses. And also remember, there's besides the 5 senses, there's also the organic or the internal organs, and also the kinesthetic, which is movement. Think about similes and metaphors that fit in with this world or this dominant impression that you're trying to present. Think about where you'll be using dialogue, what purpose your dialogue will serve. When you're choosing dialogue, make sure it's not just cliche or things that everybody says. Make sure it's something that's particular to that person and to that situation. Also think about, what overall message do you want to get across to your reader. So very important to understand your purpose and your audience. What concept do you want to emphasize? Make sure that what you're emphasizing is not just good for you, but also good for your audience as well. Hope this helps, and I'm looking forward to starting to read your first drafts.